Anna Parker had always considered herself a rational woman. At 38, she prided herself on her ability to keep things together. Her career, her marriage, her life. She and Jake had been married for 10 years, and while their relationship had its ups and downs, she had never suspected anything was seriously wrong. Sure, he had been distant lately, spending more time at the gym, glued to his phone a little more than usual. But she had chalked it up to stress. Work had been tough on both of them, and after a decade together, she figured a little distance was normal. What she didn't expect was for her husband of 10 years to leave her via text. She had been sitting in her office, finishing up a late report, when her phone buzzed. At first, she barely noticed it. It was a Tuesday, nothing special. She assumed it was a reminder from her banking app or maybe a message from her best friend, Lisa, about their weekend plans. But when she glanced at the screen, her entire world tilted. "I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 18-year-old babe. Don't try to contact me." For a moment, her brain refused to process what she was reading. She blinked, expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something else. Anything else. Maybe it was a joke, a terrible autocorrect mistake. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing for a logical explanation. She read it again. And again. The air in her office suddenly felt too thick, her vision blurred at the edges. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed too loudly. The clatter of keyboards and quiet murmurs of her coworkers faded into static. Her hands felt cold, her breath shallow. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Her first instinct was to call him. Maybe this was some kind of bizarre prank, a stupid misunderstanding. But when she tapped his name in her contacts, the call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. A sinking feeling spread through her chest. She opened their text thread and typed out a response, her fingers trembling. "What the hell, Jake?" "No read receipt." She tried again. "Are you serious? What is this?" "Nothing." Her heart pounded as she stared at the words on the screen. Miami? An 18-year-old? What was he talking about? This wasn't real. This wasn't her life. Shoving her chair back, she grabbed her bag and bolted from the office, barely hearing her manager calling after her. She needed to get home. She needed to see for herself that this was some kind of mistake, that he was there, that their life hadn't just unraveled in one cold, detached message. The drive home was a blur of red lights and honking cars. She barely remembered parking, barely felt the cold evening air as she rushed up the stairs to their apartment, fumbling with the keys. The moment she pushed open the door, her stomach dropped. The place was eerily quiet. Jake's sneakers, usually by the door, were gone. His gym bag, which normally sat in the hallway, was missing. She moved through the apartment like she was in a dream. Or more accurately, a nightmare. Their bedroom was the worst. His closet doors were wide open, half empty. The drawers where he kept his shirts and socks were left ajar, barren except for a few stray hangers and an old receipt. She checked the bathroom. His toothbrush was missing. The small things, the ones she hadn't even thought about until now, hit her the hardest. His cologne wasn't on the dresser. The phone charger he always left tangled in a mess of wires was gone. Panic swelled in her throat as she grabbed her phone and checked their shared bank account. The balance was lower than she remembered. Far lower. He had taken money. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to make it clear this wasn't just an impulse decision. He had planned this. Her breath hitched as she sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. Her husband had left her. Not in person, not even with a phone call. A text. A goddamn text. And he had left her for an 18-year-old. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not yet. She needed answers first. She needed to understand how her marriage had disintegrated without her even noticing. She called him again, and again, each attempt met with silence. She switched tactics and opened social media. His Instagram was still public. And there it was. Her first real clue. A post from 2 days ago, a photo of a beachside cocktail tagged in Miami. She scrolled down, her fingers shaking, until she found her. Tessa. She looked like a teenager. Long, dark hair, impossibly smooth skin, bright eyes that had probably never seen heartbreak. She was wearing a tiny bikini, her arm wrapped around Jake's waist, her smile wide and carefree. The caption was a single heart emoji. Emma felt like she was going to be sick. Her husband, her partner, the man she had built a life with, had left her for a girl barely old enough to vote, and he hadn't even had the decency to tell her in person. She was humiliated, angry, devastated. But most of all, she was determined. She wasn't going to let him just walk away from their life like this. If he thought he could disappear into the Miami sun with some bare-legal fling and leave her in ruins, he had another thing coming. Emma wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and took a deep breath. Jake might have left her on read. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first few days after Jake's text felt like a surreal nightmare. Emma moved through them in a daze, alternating between shock, rage, and the unbearable weight of humiliation. Every morning she woke up hoping she'd imagined it all, but the empty side of the bed and the absence of his things reminded her that this was real. He was gone. And he hadn't just left her. He had replaced her with someone barely out of high school. The worst part was how sudden it felt. One day they were sharing takeout on the couch, talking about weekend plans. The next, he was gone, erasing himself from their shared life as if it had never mattered. Had she missed the signs? Had he always been planning this? Or had he just woken up one day and decided that 10 years of marriage meant nothing? She didn't know which possibility was worse. By Friday, the initial fog of shock had lifted just enough for the anger to settle in. She sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open, scrolling through Jake's social media. His Instagram, once a mix of gym selfies and vacation pictures they had taken together, now looked like a highlight reel of his new life. He had already changed his bio to include a palm tree emoji and the words, "Living my best life in Miami." There were pictures of expensive dinners, rooftop pools, and, of course, Tessa. Always Tessa. The sight of her made Emma's stomach churn. It wasn't just the fact that she was younger, it was the way she posed for the camera, completely oblivious to the wreckage she had left behind. Did she even know about Emma? Did she care? Or did she just see Jake as an older, richer guy who could fund her weekends in the sun? Emma slammed her laptop shut and reached for her phone. She needed to talk to someone who would understand, someone who would tell her she wasn't crazy for feeling like the entire world had flipped upside down. Lisa picked up on the second ring. "Please tell me you're finally ready to burn his stuff," Lisa said, skipping a greeting entirely. Emma let out a humorless laugh. "I'd love to, but there's barely anything left. He took everything." "Of course he did. Cowards always run before facing the mess they made." Lisa's voice was sharp with anger, and Emma could picture her pacing her tiny apartment, probably already plotting revenge. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't even know where to start, Lisa. He drained our account. Not everything, but enough to make it clear that he's not planning to come back. I don't know if I should call a lawyer, change the locks, or... I don't know. Track him down and dump a drink in his lap?" Lisa snorted. "Oh, honey, you need to do all of those things. But first, let's get you out of that apartment. I'm picking you up in an hour. Wear something that doesn't scream abandoned wife." Emma wanted to argue, to say she wasn't in the mood, but the truth was, sitting alone in the apartment she had once shared with Jake felt unbearable. She needed a distraction. An hour later, Lisa pulled up outside Emma's building in her old Honda, blasting 2000s breakup anthems at full volume. Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. Lisa had always known how to make her laugh, even in the worst moments. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as she climbed in. "Somewhere that serves alcohol in large glasses," Lisa said, shifting into drive. "And somewhere that doesn't remind you of him." They ended up at a dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the music wasn't so loud that you couldn't have a conversation. Emma ordered a whiskey sour, something stronger than her usual wine, while Lisa opted for a margarita. "So," Lisa said, stirring her drink with her straw, "have you thought about what comes next?" Emma let out a heavy breath. "You mean besides crying in my shower and stress eating an entire pizza?" Lisa gave her a pointed look. I mean legally. You need to talk to a divorce lawyer. Emma hesitated. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it. She had, but calling a lawyer made it feel so final, like she was officially admitting that there was no fixing this, that Jake wasn't coming back. Lisa must have seen the doubt on her face because she leaned forward, her expression serious. Emma, he left you for a teenager. By text, he took your money and ran. He doesn't get to just walk away from this like it was nothing. Emma swallowed hard. She knew Lisa was right. The next morning, she made the call. The lawyer's office was in a sleek downtown building, the kind that smelled like expensive coffee and freshly printed contracts. Emma sat stiffly in a leather chair as a woman named Rachel Montgomery, a no-nonsense divorce attorney with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, flipped through a folder with Emma's financial documents. Your husband is an idiot, Rachel said bluntly, setting the folder down. Emma blinked. I mean, yeah, but legally speaking? Rachel smirked. Legally speaking, he's still an idiot. He didn't just leave you, he abandoned the marriage without any discussion. That's going to work in your favor. The fact that he drained your joint account, also a bad move on his part. We can argue financial misconduct. Emma felt a flicker of hope. So he doesn't just get to keep everything? Not if I have anything to say about it, Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. I'm going to need more details. Your assets, his income, any debts. But from what I see so far, you have a strong case for getting what you're entitled to. Emma exhaled slowly. For the first time since that text, she felt like she had some control again. Rachel glanced at her notes. Do you know where he is now? Emma clenched her jaw. Miami. Rachel arched a brow. Of course he is. She scribbled something on a notepad. Here's what happens next. We file for divorce. We freeze any joint accounts he hasn't touched yet. And we make sure he knows he can't just walk away from this without consequences. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. Jake thought he could leave her behind like yesterday's news. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. Emma had always thought of divorce as something that happened to other people. Messy breakups splashed across gossip columns, bitter custody battles, and dramatic courtroom showdowns. It had never crossed her mind that she would one day find herself sitting in a law office, reviewing spreadsheets of assets, trying to figure out just how much damage her soon-to-be ex-husband had done before vanishing to Miami. The legal process started almost immediately after her first meeting with Rachel Montgomery. The attorney wasted no time filing the initial paperwork, officially putting Jake on notice that Emma was seeking a divorce. It felt strange to see the words in writing. Irreconcilable differences. Such a sterile, detached phrase for something that had torn her life apart. But it was the fastest way forward, and Emma was done wasting time on a man who had discarded her like an old pair of shoes. Within days, Rachel had also moved to freeze any joint accounts that still had money left. Jake had already taken a significant portion of their savings, but there was still enough left for Emma to claim what was rightfully hers. More importantly, Rachel was digging into their financial history, looking for any evidence of misconduct that could be used against him. He's been reckless, Rachel told her during their second meeting, and reckless people make mistakes. If he drained your joint account to fund his new lifestyle, that's going to be a problem for him. Emma clung to that thought like a lifeline. She wanted justice not just for the money he had taken, but for the way he had left her. Humiliated, blindsided, and discarded. But Jake, unsurprisingly, wasn't making things easy. The first major hurdle came when Rachel tried to serve him the divorce papers. He had left no forwarding address, no official record of where he was staying in Miami. His last known location was a high-end condo complex on South Beach, but when the process server showed up, the front desk claimed he wasn't listed as a resident. He's hiding, Lisa said when Emma told her over drinks one night, because he knows he's screwed up and he's too much of a coward to face you. Emma took a sip of her wine, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. I just don't get it. Why run? He was so confident when he left, like he was untouchable. Now, he's dodging legal papers? Lisa smirked. Probably because his 18-year-old babe is getting a little too real for him. I give it 2 months before she realizes he's a washed-up loser and ditches him. Emma wanted to believe that, but she wasn't willing to wait around and see how Jake's relationship played out. She needed to move forward, and she needed closure. Rachel, however, had a backup plan. If he won't accept service in person, we'll do it another way, she said. We can file for alternative service, essentially serving him via email or publication if we can prove he's deliberately avoiding us. Emma hesitated. How long does that take? Rachel sighed. It's not immediate, but it's an option. In the meantime, I have a few contacts in Miami. We'll find him. Days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself in a strange limbo. On paper, she was still married, but emotionally, she was already moving on. She forced herself to go back to work, to reestablish a routine that didn't revolve around Jake. She started running again, something she had given up years ago when Jake's schedule had always taken priority over hers. She reconnected with old friends, went out more, and even entertained the idea of dating again, though the thought of trusting another man still felt impossible. Then, one afternoon, Rachel called with news. We found him. Emma's breath caught. Where? Still in Miami. He's using a rental property under someone else's name, probably to avoid legal trouble, but we got an address. It turned out that Jake was living in a luxury high-rise, one of those glass and steel towers overlooking the ocean, the kind of place where men in their 40s went to reinvent themselves as rich bachelors, trying to keep up with the younger crowd. Rachel wasted no time in getting a process server to his building, and this time they had a stroke of luck. Jake was spotted at the valet station waiting for his car. The server walked right up to him, handed him the documents, and left before Jake could even react. Emma received the report later that evening. He tried to claim he didn't know what it was at first, Rachel told her with a chuckle. But once he saw the divorce papers, he wasn't so cocky anymore. Emma wished she could have seen his face. Jake finally broke his silence the next day. After weeks of ignoring her calls and messages, he sent a single text. Did you really have to send a lawyer after me? Emma stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Of all the things he could have said after everything he had done, this was what he chose? Not an apology, not even an explanation, just a complaint that she was holding him accountable. She debated ignoring him, but after a moment, she typed out a response. Did you really have to abandon our marriage over text? He didn't reply. With the papers officially served, the legal battle could begin. Jake had two options, either sign the papers and finalize the divorce quickly, or drag things out and make it as painful as possible. Emma had a feeling she knew which one he would choose. And she was ready for it. The days after Jake was officially served with divorce papers felt different. Lighter, somehow. Emma hadn't realized just how much weight she had been carrying, how much of her energy had been spent waiting, wondering if he would ever acknowledge what he had done. Now, it didn't matter. The process had started, and there was no turning back. At first, she expected Jake to fight. He had always been stubborn, always hated losing. She thought he would contest the divorce out of sheer spite, that he would drag out negotiations just to make her miserable. But instead, he went quiet. Too quiet. Rachel kept her updated on the legal proceedings, and over the next few weeks it became clear that Jake wasn't putting up much of a fight. He hadn't hired an expensive lawyer, he hadn't tried to challenge the division of assets. In fact, it almost seemed like he was trying to get the whole thing over with as quickly as possible. He wants out, Rachel told her over the phone one afternoon. Honestly, I think he's realizing that Miami isn't quite the fantasy he thought it would be. Emma wasn't sure how to feel about that. A part of her wanted him to suffer, to regret every decision he had made. Another part of her just wanted to be done with him, to close this chapter and move forward without looking back. Then, one evening, Jake finally reached out again. She was sitting on her couch flipping through Netflix when her phone buzzed. She stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before opening the message. "Can we talk?" Emma exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She hadn't spoken to him since the day he left. Every interaction since then had been through lawyers. She hesitated, then typed back. "What is there to talk about?" A few minutes passed before he replied. "I just want to explain. Emma almost laughed. Now he wanted to explain? After all this time? After the way he had humiliated her, drained their account, and disappeared like she had never mattered? She should have ignored him. She should have blocked his number and left him to deal with the mess he had created. But a small, stubborn part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. Not because she wanted him back, not because she needed closure from him, but because she deserved to know the truth. Fine, one conversation, but I'm not going to make this easy for you. Jake responded almost immediately. Meet me tomorrow? Coffee shop near your office? She debated saying no, but then she thought about how she had spent the last few months rebuilding herself, reclaiming her life. She wasn't the woman he had left behind anymore, and she wasn't afraid of him. So she agreed. The next day, she walked into the coffee shop feeling strangely calm. She spotted Jake right away, sitting at a corner table, looking different than she remembered. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked thinner, more tired. The Miami glow he had been flaunting online had faded. She took a deep breath and walked over. He looked up as she approached, and for a split second she saw something in his expression. Regret, maybe? But she pushed that thought aside and sat down. Neither of them spoke at first. Emma simply stared at him, waiting. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. "You look good," he said. Emma raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." Jake let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I probably deserve that." She folded her arms. "You wanted to talk. So talk." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "I know I handled things badly." Emma scoffed. "Badly? You ended our 10-year marriage over text, Jake. Then you disappeared and drained our savings. You didn't just handle it badly, you were a complete coward." He flinched, but she didn't care. He needed to hear it. Jake leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. I don't have an excuse for how I left, but I need you to know that it wasn't about you." Emma rolled her eyes. "Oh, of course. It's never about me, is it?" "I mean it," he insisted. "I was, lost, bored. I felt like my life was just going nowhere. I woke up one day and realized I wasn't happy." Emma stared at him, anger rising in her chest. "So instead of talking to me, you ran off to Miami with a barely legal college girl? That was your solution?" Jake sighed. "It felt exciting at first, like I was getting a fresh start. But it wasn't real. It never was." He looked down at his hands. "Tessa left me." Emma blinked. She wasn't sure why that surprised her. "She got tired of me," he admitted, shaking his head. "Said I was too old, too controlling. She wanted to party all the time, and I couldn't keep up." He let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out I wasn't her dream guy, just a guy who could buy her expensive drinks and pay for vacations." Emma sat back, watching him crumble in front of her. A few months ago, this would have made her feel vindicated, but now, it just felt pathetic. "I thought leaving would make me happy," Jake continued, "but it didn't. I made a mistake, Emma." She tilted her head. "So what? You want me to feel sorry for you?" He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw it, real regret. "No," he said quietly. "I just wanted to tell you that I know I messed up, and I'm sorry." Emma exhaled, feeling something inside her shift. She had spent months waiting for this moment, waiting to hear him say those words, but now that he had, it didn't change anything. She wasn't the same woman he had left. She had built herself back up, piece by piece. She had learned how to live without him, how to be happy without needing an apology, and that, more than anything, was what set her free. She stood up, grabbing her purse. "I appreciate the apology, Jake, but it doesn't change anything." He looked up at her, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Emma..." She shook her head. "We're done. I don't hate you, but I don't forgive you either, and I don't owe you anything." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Maybe, finally, he understood. Emma turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping onto the street with a deep breath. The divorce was almost finalized. Her life was her own again. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free.